Now, if your first design feels good, chances are it's probably not. You see, great artists just don't settle. They dig. They try to find the version that is riskier, that is truer, and more alive. The real breakthroughs tend to happen when you push past that impulse, when you iterate, when you question assumptions, and when you experiment until it feels uniquely yours. Now I'm losing my voice, so I'm going to have my co-instructor of the group mentorship, Arie, take over this lesson. He is going to break down design strategy and instruct you on how to push your ideas further so that you're going to have a more personality and intent within them. Take it over.
So when we are designing a simple object like a chest, we need to think about what the first thing would be that the average person would actually be able to come up with. And the first thing that I think people will be able to come up with is just the simple box and like semi-cylinder shape that you can see being drawn right now. This is not an interesting sketch. It is too basic. It is a good starting point, a good foundation, good to use as a construction, but it lacks any sort of design choices because this is, once again, it's just essentially you've drawn a form. You've not necessarily drawn a chest yet. It's just a form that is recognizable as a chest because of the shape you've chosen to use. So one of the first things we want to do is we want to start by essentially adding more interesting shapes into the design by going inside and outside of the silhouette and essentially being able to create these more unique shapes by adding some rhythm to the design. And that alone already starts setting the design apart a little bit more, although I would still argue this chest is still a drawing of a chest rather than a design of a chest. So what do? We take that shape and we essentially try to manipulate it. And there's multiple ways where we can manipulate shapes. Like for example, imagine my front silhouette is just this rectangle and I want to manipulate it. So the first thing we've actually done is we've grabbed that shape and we've started by adding that rhythm that we discussed earlier to the shape to hopefully add a little bit more interesting and unique aspects to the design that might be able to set it apart at least slightly from its original counterpart. So you can see this is already more interesting. It has the proper rhythm to it with the shapes sort of going inwards and outwards. But what we can then do is essentially, what if we like try to frame this in a grid? And we can grab this and essentially just warp and manipulate it to represent something that's hopefully more interesting. And we can even warp it even more by sort of pushing some of the corners. The tricky thing with warping a shape is obviously we're not just warping the shape, we're also still respecting the perspective. So the perspective still needs to be accurate even in a sketch like this. But you can see how with a few simple steps, the shapes alone can carry a design to the next level. Now there's other things we want to do, and that's something we'll discuss right in a moment. So the next things we can do to set our design apart is really, in my opinion, where the fun part begins. And with designing in particular, the trick is to let your brain roam free and really rely on your power of associative thinking, which means you hear a word, the first word that comes to mind is the next word that you might be able to use in your design choices. And this is something that everyone can do. You particularly did this quite often as a child because, you know, when you're talking to a child, so quite often you'll find maybe it's hard to kind of follow where the conversation is going and how we actually got to that point. Well, that's kind of what we want to emulate in this sort of creative thinking. So when someone starts talking to me about designing a treasure chest, for example, and they'll say, oh yeah, so I want a pirate treasure chest. So I immediately think skull. All right, from skull I can start expanding. And okay, so skull, pirate, I think beard as well. Skull, pirate, beard. Well, maybe we can introduce some tentacles, some ocean elements. So that's how you can sort of get to, okay, so I can incorporate a skull with a tentacle beard, and maybe that's a nice and unique feature to set this design apart more. Now, aside from just skull, tentacle, beard, like we can also introduce a bandana. Maybe we could even do like a tricorn hat if we want to. But after, you've sort of exhausted the sort of priority options based on that one word, then we can start thinking about, okay, what other words can we associate with pirates? Well, obviously the ocean. And when you're thinking about the ocean, well, it means maybe we can get a wave pattern in. So maybe the wooden boards have been carved out to follow a certain wave pattern. We can use that as an element in our design as well. The waves sort of look like tentacles anyway, so we can keep the same shape language alive. And that way we can sort of still keep everything nice and neatly tied together. And then we can also kind of follow that up. Okay, swords. Where can we put a sword possibly in this design? We can stick it randomly in the chest, but we can also just stab it into the side and use it as a handle, as a way to lift the chest up. And suddenly, once again, our design starts taking on a new meaning, or, well, the same meaning essentially, but we are just being a bit more adventurous with the elements that we have access to. And we might want to stick them into random places where they wouldn't necessarily belong. And I think this is part of the joy of designing, where you can take something like some more standard elements that most people would be able to come up with. You just kind of rearrange them in a way where you can create something that feels still unique and interesting to look at. And that's kind of the end goal here. Now, this sort of way of thinking, the associative thinking, is very much tied to ADHD, by the way. So in this case, if you have ADHD, it's going to be a superpower. You just need to learn how to not inhibit your own thoughts. Because chances are, if you were an artist kid growing up, you were having these crazy ideas. Sometimes people might have said, that's weird, or that's maybe stupid. Well, you need to shut down that voice immediately if you hear it again in your head. That's the voice of that tries to contain your ideas, tries to force you to be maybe less productive, less adventurous with your designs. And we really want to get that sense of whimsy back into the way we go about designing things. So I do hope that mentality at least sticks with you guys, because that is going to make such a big difference in your design choices and how creative and adventurous they can potentially be.
Hey guys, I'm back again just for a minor quick interruption. Just a heads up, we've opened the waitlist for the new environment design course launching in 2026. It is an imaginative landscape painting course with lectures, demos, and focused exercises that'll help you actually apply what you learn, not just watch it. It's perfect if you're new and want a solid foundation, or if you're intermediate and you feel like you got some gaps to fill. And also, our one-on-one mentorships are fully booked until February. So if you're thinking about joining, make sure you check the links below for all upcoming course information and availability.
So for the next chest, it's essentially the same principle. Like in this case, let's design a Viking chest, right? And when we think about Viking, there's a couple of words that immediately kind of jump to mind. Like I immediately think of the ships. The ships are very recognizable, as well as the shields. Aside from the shields, I'd say dragon is also a big part, and then horns. And this is obviously based on stereotypes, not necessarily on research. So I'm just kind of using my intuition to tell me, okay, what are the core things that immediately come to mind when I think about, like in this case, the general things that we associate with Vikings. So the ship is, I think, the most interesting take here. Like the ship is the one that can carry the entire design if I want to. So I can turn the ship upside down, use that as a lid for the chest, and immediately I have a fun and unique shape that I can work with and that I can exaggerate. And obviously on the ship we have the dragons, but if the ship is upside down, am I gonna put the dragon head upside down as well? I don't think so. I think it's gonna be designed particularly to look like it has the same shape language, but the head is gonna be the right side up, and I can use that to my advantage as well. Maybe even I can continue that train of thought and turn this entire ship design into like a chest that looks like a walking dragon made of the hull of a ship, essentially. So I might eventually end up adding some feet to the chest that allow us to get more of that dragon feel in there. The horns can be added on the back because we need some kind of shape that's sort of poking through the silhouette, so that we have a nice balance. And the shield might be actually part of the lock, because obviously it's still a chest, it needs to be locked, and we can actually use that to our advantage as well. Now a lock needs a key. Rather than a key, maybe it's going to be a sword. Again, using that word association, I can immediately come to those conclusions, and that sword can then be used to kind of be put like dead center of the central shield, which is now a unique design feature for the ship, dragon, chest that we've just come up with. So that's the idea, that's the way this sort of goes usually. And once again, try to stay loose, try to allow your thoughts to jump from one thought to another, and that's really going to make a big difference. Now, the general shape is established, the dragon is there, but rather than having two dragon heads on either side, we are going to add in the tail, and the tail can now be used as a way to, once again, complete the illusion that this dragon or this chest is actually a dragon. And I think that's a big part in why, for example, adding that right there is definitely a good call in making it feel perhaps a bit more interesting and balanced. It's just whenever you have these kind of silly ideas, lean into them rather than trying to stay away from them. We want to essentially capitalize on the crazy ideas and see how we can make the crazy work rather than sticking to the safe options. Once we actually have the entire design, that's when it starts becoming a bit more easy to move on to the next train of thought, and that's now we need some contrast in the material and the texture. Since the boat already has the horizontal lines, the horizontal pattern for the wooden boards. At first I thought I was going to do the same thing down low for the bottom of the chest, but that didn't seem like it would fit right. So maybe actually we can use some of the dragon sort of scale aesthetic to our advantage in that case to differentiate the top from the bottom a little bit more clearly. So this is the thought process behind it, and I hope you guys really understand how important it is to allow yourself to have those more random ideas, to capitalize on them, because they make a big impact in how recognizable your design eventually will be. Just for the sake of polishing off this demo, might as well refine these to like what I would consider almost finished state. These are still sketches. I'm still not gonna bring them to a final result, but you know, a very base layer of color and lighting can really do anything you need it to do when it comes to concept art. The design just needs to be readable and representable. We can use some colorful color accents really to make the design pop quite a lot more, and that's essentially what I'm trying to go for. I'm trying to maximize the readability by using the lighting to my advantage to portray the 3D form of what I have drawn, and I'm trying to use the colors to make them stand out quite a bit more, making the colors pop. Now obviously this is mostly for a stylized project, which if you are not working in a stylized fashion, then you can just do the same thing. You just kind of tone down how obvious those different color accents and those color notes are, specifically in the lighting. But the color palette really does need to tie it all together quite nicely. The important thing to keep in mind, and this might be a subject for a future lesson, is we need to have ratios that make sense, which means we're going to have mostly one color, a little bit of another, and then a tiny bit of another, which means, for example, in the case of the pirate chest, it's going to be mostly brown and gold. It's going to be less purple, and then a tiny bit of red and the teal color. While with the Viking chest, you'll see it's going to be mostly brown, less blue, and then an accent of yellow and red. In that order, the colors are taking less and less of a center stage. They're less noticeable, essentially, which causes us to still have a nice and coherent overview over what we have made. So this is going to be the class for this month. I hope you guys found it enjoyable and found it educational. Let me know if you have any requests for what you'd like to see in the future. But for now, that's going to be it. Take care.